Have you recently gotten your first camera and starting out has been a struggle? In this video, I'll be going over the very basics to get you going. Let's get to it. Hi there, I am Duan and this is DMଃ-stop, where we share clips about nature and content creation. Today we'll be diving into the exposure triangle. This triangle is the very basics when it comes to photography and also videography. And even though it is the basics, it is used by even the professionals too. So you might be wondering, what is the exposure triangle? Well, the exposure triangle refers to the three main aspects of a camera, and it also helps you understand why they are important and how they complement each other to give you the best footage. The three corners of the triangle are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Now, you might also be asking, what are these? So before we jump into how they work and complement each other, let's jump into what each of these things are. Before we get into the triangle, it is important to note that any form of capturing with a camera is simply the camera collecting light and displaying it to your eyes. Without light, there will be no image to show. Aperture refers to the opening on the front of your lens. You can adjust this opening by adjusting the f-stop on your camera. The f-stop number is directly linked to the size your aperture opens and closes. The smaller your f number is, the larger your aperture. And the larger your f number is, the smaller your aperture. The reason it seems to work counterintuitively is because the f number is in fact a fraction and not a normal number. For example, a f number of 2 refers to a fraction of f over 2. For example, if f were 1, f2 would be 1 over 2 or a half. And f10 would be 1 over 10, a tenth. So as you can see, the larger the f-stop becomes, the smaller the aperture actually is. So always remember that the f-stop is a fraction, and it will make a lot more sense when it comes to the relationship between the f-stop and the aperture size. Now that you know what aperture refers to, let's get into how it works. As you adjust the f-stop on your camera, the aperture will then either open wider or close to become smaller. Remember when I said that a camera captures light? Well, the aperture closing or opening influences the amount of light entering the camera. Therefore, when you have a larger aperture such as f2, the camera will receive much more light than having the aperture of f10. The larger your aperture, the more light your camera will see and the brighter your image will be. Next, we have shutter speed. And this refers to how quickly your camera is capturing an image and is represented in seconds. Taking into account what we learned about cameras capturing light, which shutter speed do you think will result in a brighter image? Yes, the longer the shutter opens, the more light it can let in and the brighter the image will be. If you take an image at a shutter speed of 1 over 2, the camera shutter will open for half a second and then close. Likewise, if you take an image at a shutter speed of 1 over 1000, the camera shutter will open for 1/1000th of a second and then close. So the 1 over 2 shutter speed will be much brighter than the 1 over 1000 shutter speed. The last corner of the triangle is ISO. ISO refers to the sensitivity of the camera sensor. The lower the ISO number, the less sensitive the camera is to light. And the higher the ISO number, the more sensitive the camera is to light. Therefore, taking an image with a low ISO number such as 100 will result in a darker image, and taking an image with a higher ISO such as 4000 will result in a brighter image. With all three corners of the exposure triangle, there is a catch to having more light, however. Having brighter images will also influence some other factors, and that is why the exposure triangle is important to understand. Coming back to aperture. The aperture also influences your depth of field, which means at a larger aperture such as f2, less of the image will be in focus, compared to an aperture of f10, where a larger area will be in focus. If you want to capture an image of a bird, for example, you would want to have a shallow or thin depth of field. In other words, a large aperture. This will result in a beautiful image where the bird is sharp and in focus while the background is blurred. On the other hand, when you want to take a picture of a landscape, you would want everything to be in focus, and therefore you use a small aperture to increase the depth of field. If you would like to know why this happens, comment depth of field in the comments and I will make a video about it in the future. When it comes to shutter speed, the slower your shutter speed, the brighter your image will be, but it will also result in your image being more blurry when shooting by hand. This is because the camera is capturing all the light entering even when you move your camera in that time. If you have a quicker shutter speed, the chances are less that the camera will see when you move since it will open and close so quickly that the image would appear as if time was frozen. Unless you are using a tripod or trying to take creative footage, you would always want a quicker shutter speed to ensure your images are nice and sharp. And lastly, the catch of making your images brighter with a larger ISO number is that it will result in more noisy images. Have you ever increased the volume of a sound recording to the point you start hearing the noise? Well, ISO on a camera does exactly this, but only with light. Boosting your ISO increases the on your image, and when increasing it too high, you will start noticing distortion as grain or speckles on your image, specifically in the darker areas of your image. Knowing the catches or benefits of each corner of the triangle, we can now use these to our advantage to make an image the way we want it. What this all means? Listening to me talk about all these things must have been very interesting. But still you ask, what does it all mean? Here are some examples. If you are shooting a bird, it is essential that you have a fast shutter speed to freeze time and get your friend as sharp as possible. But you may also want a shallow depth of field to get that nice blurry background. So in this case, you can only increase your ISO to balance the brightness. A good starting point for shooting handheld is to set your shutter speed at twice your lens length. For example, with a 50mm lens, set your shutter speed to 1/100 and see how that works for you. Then you can adjust your aperture and ISO. If you are shooting a landscape, you can start by setting your aperture to around f10. And in this case, the landscape won't fly away, so you can have a much slower shutter speed than when trying to capture a moving subject. Always try to keep your ISO as low as possible to have as little as possible noise. One last tip for someone starting out is to not try using manual mode until you are comfortable with your camera and settings. The camera has modes for you to choose from to help you get the most out of your camera and shoot the best images possible. If you would like to know more about the different camera modes, comment camera modes in the comments section, and the most comments between camera modes and depth of field will determine my next video for you guys. That is it for the exposure triangle, and I hope you learned something useful today. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and leave a comment. And if you would like to see more videos like this in the future, please consider subscribing and turn on the notifications by clicking on the bell icon. I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.